I'd like to welcome everyone to the first session of the Design for Aging Knowledge Community for 2022. We have a good lineup of programs this year, so looking forward to that. And I am with LCM Architects and I co-chair the knowledge community with Heidi Wang. And today we're welcoming Jack Schroeder of Land & Bone Baker, who is going to present the new project that they're developing for the Chicago Lighthouse. So this is a housing program that is unique in the country, and it's using low-income tax credits. And it's interesting because it's the first residential program for Chicago Lighthouse. And we're looking forward to a great presentation. At the end, I'll give a brief summary of some of the upcoming programs. So if you stay on, we can discuss that, but that'll be after the Q&A, following the presentation. Okay, Jack, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, welcome. Thanks for attending. Like Steve said, I'll be showing you the Foglia Residences at Chicago Lighthouse. As far as we know, it is the first low-income housing tax credit sponsored housing development for blind or visually impaired in the country. So that in itself is really exciting. For the presentation, I'll tell you a little bit about our office really quickly, and then also just how the project kind of came to be. Run you through design and layout, and then at the end really dig into some of the fine detailing and some of the features that are really specific to visually impaired residents. My name's Jack Schroeder. I'm a principal with Land & Bone Baker Architects. I'm not able to switch my slide. Okay, there we go. We have been around for, I think, around 35 years, created and have always been to serve designing affordable housing and community-based work, mostly in Chicago. Other people on the team are Bria Page, Jeff Bone is here as well, Andrew Arkell in our office has done a lot of work on this, Catherine Baker. It's been around for a little while, since probably 2017, like a lot of our projects. It takes a minute to develop. We do both rehab and new construction, and a lot of our business is kind of thankfully built around repeat clients, some of those going back as far as those 35 years that the firm's been around. So the way this project came into our office was actually from one of those repeat clients, David Brent with Brinshaw Development, which is a longtime for-profit developer of affordable housing. He came to us, he served on the Chicago Lighthouse's board for a number of years and told us that they were interested in providing housing, which is something they had not done in the past, and specifically housing that was near to their headquarters and where they provide a lot of their services. And for those that don't know, this slide is just speaking to all the great things that Chicago Lighthouse does, kind of focused in four main areas: education, vision care, rehabilitation, the sort of healthcare part of it, employment on that same facility which we share a site with. They have manufacturing jobs. They have a call center. There's a podcast studio. Within that same building, there's a elementary school for children with visual impairment, a clinic, and then they also, in the past, have helped with independent living, but more on ways to sort of change units, get them kind of suited for this population, rather than creating whole new units. So that's a brief kind of sense of who they are. David brought us in, and we got to tour the facility and meet all these great people. And their mission is just really clear and really strong, and immediately pretty excited to partner with them. Initially, I'll kind of show you where we are situated. This is, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but Roosevelt running east and west, and then Ashland is kind of the first main drag running north-south. This is the existing facility. It's just a two-story kind of sprawling building, and we were given this little corner to find a spot for our development. It was an existing parking lot. You can kind of see here Roosevelt has developed in a fairly non-urban way, I would say. You know, there's a lot of parking. Buildings tend to be sort of pulled back. And I should say this falls within the Illinois Medical District. It's its own planned development. And for our development, when we worked with the IMD, they actually have some new plans to diversify the programming within the medical district. They were excited to see housing. They did want sort of a retail element. They were in support of us kind of moving further out to the street and creating more of an urban sort of sidewalk feel. So while it was complex and they're in control of the plan development, we were kind of checking a lot of the boxes for how they want to start thinking about the Illinois Medical District. This is just zooming in a little closer. Again, you can see the existing building. Crenshaw back here is really kind of a service drive or alley. It's not a very active street, so all of their parking and services come off of there. Wood is a quieter street that kind of shoots back into the medical district, and then Roosevelt, as a lot of you probably know, is a pretty busy street. So that kind of situates you on site. There's an existing play space that serves the school that's kind of found in this corner of the building. And their main entry point is this turnaround. And it really is kind of the heart of their organization, kind of comes through this space. And they use both Roosevelt and this turnaround to access the site. In making the case for height and density, we did do some look at the surrounding area. So immediately around us, there's some kind of lower scale buildings, but we need to sort of make the case that this 9-story building does have, you know, some precedent within the area, which it clearly does. So not a super hard case to make, but something that we wanted to do and went so far as really sort of counting out stories and figuring out what the immediate surroundings held. So pretty quickly, we jumped into programming and massing and bigger ideas. You know, at this point, we're not really thinking about the fine details, but really just what does this organization want? How does this building best serve them? And the main 3 to 4 components of the program were obviously housing. You know, they wanted to provide as many units as they could reasonably on site. Parking, mostly to offset the parking that they were losing and possibly to gain some, because there is so much that happens in their existing facility. The parking need for the visually impaired residences is actually pretty low. There's not a lot of people that own cars in that population. So we were trying to hit the right balance with how much parking we kept on site. It's actually within TOD framework. We have high traffic buses along Ashland and Roosevelt, and we're just outside of the radius of the pink line. So it's actually a really well situated building. So sorry, housing, parking, and then a shared community auditorium or lecture space was part of the program. And the idea with that being that they could do some fundraising and lectures and really a lot of different functions, possibly even rent that space out. As you'll see, as we develop this, that went a little by the wayside as we got into it. But starting with this first concept at the top, which actually is kind of closest to where we landed. It's kind of retail and lobby space at the bottom, parking for a few spaces, and then residents with a roof deck above. We briefly looked at this option 2 down here, where we actually physically bridged back to the existing building with that auditorium space kind of being the link. This obviously was pretty complex. most likely pretty expensive, so it was kind of put to rest. And then option 3 was a little like option 1, but really expanded this auditorium space. And what we came to realize was overlapping those really public functions was really kind of just hurting the resident experience. The level of security that would be needed, the complexity of the vertical circulation did not lend itself to the simplicity that's desired for a visually impaired population. So as you'll see, that auditorium kind of slimmed down to more of a community space, and then physically we landed more in this range. So once we kind of nailed down the physical form and programming, we started to try to understand the resources that exist and what was out there to help us create the best project that we could for blind and visually impaired people. We were lucky enough to hook up with Chris Downey, who's an architect without sight, and he has a firm that advises municipalities, universities, designers on the best possible design for visually impaired people. He's been an advisor all the way along, and we're going to present kind of our final batch of stuff to him soon. The picture in the middle, you can see when communicating with Chris, we have to be really clear about the formatting and how our drawings are translated, because he uses a tactile printer. And this has been eye-opening throughout the process for how to communicate, whether it's with Chris or board members or staff. You really need to focus on how you're communicating. And I think as architects, we depend a lot on the visual, just in all honesty. So that's been a real learning experience, a real test. National Institute of Building Sciences has these design guidelines. AFB, American Foundation for the Blind, has a lot of great resources for fixtures and appliances. And we actually have been able to engage directly with the Lighthouse and their occupational therapy staff, which has been great. So we're just trying to pull in every resource we can, and really not leave any stone unturned. And we also partnered with Designs for Dignity, a nonprofit that does some interior and furniture design. And their specialty isn't necessarily this, but they've dug into it with us and really kind of helped us perfect the designs. I wanted to share this slide really quickly. I think this was a real learning thing for our group as well. This idea that visual impairment manifests in many different ways, depending on the affliction or age of the person. A really small percentage of people have dark blindness. It's really a matter of degrees, and that was really important to understand as we started to design these things, that we can do a lot of work that makes it more clear even at these different levels. And even for just the dark gray haze, how do we handle light? How do we handle reflection? So I think this is a really important thing to note when designing for visual impairment. So jumping into kind of more final layouts and designs, starting with the site, there were a number of features. I think ground texture is hugely important. So we have these really clear light concrete paths that are straight lines, and anytime that changes, where we have bike racks, benches, the texture and color of that changes to a paver. Likewise, at the entries, to mark those, we do the same, and we are actually really intentional about not marking the doors that are for service or exiting. So you have to be really intentional about that. We use contrasting large planters at this kind of really busy intersection at Roosevelt and Wood. Partially those serve as a barrier and a way to acknowledge that's there, and then also guide people towards the crosswalks that do exist. Zooming into that kind of great play space and garden in the middle. They already had some really great accessible structures there, so we're able to maintain those and move a second one, and really develop the garden space to try to bring out more senses. We had a pebble fountain that has a sound element to it. The plantings in the garden are varied by scent and texture. There's an attention too to whatever's in the landscape isn't growing at your feet or, at kind of head level. It still keeps the path very clear. And then obviously the texture, again, of the walking path itself, to kind of keep you pulling along and then knowing that the benches are on a different texture. And this is jumping to more the architectural site plan, first floor plan. This gives you a better sense of layout, and we maintained this existing drive and turnabout because that was kind of non-negotiable. That's needed for Lighthouse to function in a safe way, for them to be able to move people in and out through all their programming. This parking at grade is devoted to the Lighthouse, and they've got some of their vans as well. There's a commercial retail space at the corner, which is kind of well sited there for getting eyes on it. Lighthouse actually has a retail side. We're not sure yet if will be in here or if it'll just be a convenience store or coffee shop. The lobby and main entry are set back further down Wood, a quieter street. Felt like the kind of appropriate place for that to land. A huge element in designing lobby and shared spaces is simplicity. We're advised pretty clearly not to do sort of the large atrium with multiple options kind of shooting off in different directions. The clarity of layout is really important. So you enter the space and immediately are addressed by the front desk and manager's office, and then to your right is the vertical circulation and elevators. We also provided a direct kind of rear exit and bike room. This allows for easy access to this great play space and also directly to the lighthouse in kind of a safe path. And we also have a pet run out here for service animals, which is a really important feature for this building. And the lighthouse actually already has a pet run on the other side of their building, but we wanted one specifically for the tenants. Moving further up into the building, second and third floor are really simply just parking, as efficiently as we could make it happen. Obviously, our accessibility is tied closely to that vertical circulation. And then up to the fourth floor is where the residences begin. And this is what's left of that sort of auditorium concept. And it's become a pretty generous community room and roof deck with a great view east towards the city. This space may be used for semi-public functions, so we've kind of created this second vestibule here for security. And then moving further up the building is just a repetitive kind of stacked plan, a mix of studio units, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, really simple, double loaded corridor, straight lines. Again, just to really kind of simplify and make it very clear how you're supposed to move through the building. Jumping to the outside and some of the aesthetic kind of design elements. You can see the retail space here. This is that existing drive that we've maintained and comes through the building to serve that lobby. Here's the residential entry. It's marked, like I said, at grade, but also up above. We've screened the parking with this nice perforated metal so that it can have its own sort of architectural sense. None of us really want to look at the parking deck, so we're using that for signage, and we're going to do some lighting behind. And this stair tower to the side we've actually used as this beacon or its own sort of lighthouse. So this part will glow through the night, which I think is actually really cool. It's something they always wanted, and we had to find a way to integrate that without it being kind of the old East Coast lighthouse on top of the building, or however that would have manifested. I'm not sure exactly. You can see the roof deck, green roof, that's at the 4th level. As far as materials, we stuck to a pretty straightforward red brick. We wanted to speak to the existing building. And actually, a lot of the surrounding structures were also red brick, but we're playing with texture and projecting some of that brick and having some movement with the windows. With low-income housing tax credits, there's not a ton of flexibility with design and administration, so it's really about how we sort of move those within the facade. And then we have these Swiss pearl fiber cement panels here, and the idea there is, that we sort of cut into this almost like a piece of cake. That's the void that's left behind. So we really like it. We know that this is a big object, but we tried to sort of vary texture and material as it moves up. This is the view, looking back east towards town. You can see how we did maintain this open space. I think this will still get nice sunlight. Again, it is imposing, but we've varied this texture and layout a bit. You can kind of get a sense of the lighthouse here on the corner. This is the view from that main entry of the lighthouse, garden to the left. Again, the screen parking. So imposing, but I think it still is leaving this really nice space to be shared between the facilities. And this is the dusk image. And I think particularly in this area, this will add some life, into the evening and overnight to this whole area. It tends to sort of empty out. And just the idea that, some of these units will have lights on, the parking will glow, it'll be here. I think it could be a really nice addition to that stretch of Roosevelt. And having kind of run through that, I wanted to really zoom in on some of the specific features in both public and residential spaces. A little warning, I think this may get a bit repetitive. A lot of the features that work in public spaces are also really important in residential spaces. So you will hear, the word contrast an awful lot, and you will hear kind of vertical transition a lot. So I'll just jump into it. This is a kind of a axon of the lobby space that we looked at in plan. A few of the features, and this will go again throughout the project, is a dark base to show you where that wall starts, and then we even transition the flooring around these edges to create even sort of earlier warning on that. Where it's important to mark, we're marking the elevator, the different color and texture. This column that unfortunately kind of lands in the middle of the lobby has a brighter color and a different tone to visually warn people. Throughout the public space, we have protective wainscot. Part of this is for people using canes, that can tend to take a toll on the space, and then also service animals. I think it's just another layer of protection for that. There's a lot of attention to the vestibule. It needs to be right sized to allow people to come in and adjust down to light levels. So we've made it kind of generous. There's also the walk-off mat that gives a change in texture. So it's just kind of this, it's meant to be kind of a sensitive space that you're able to sort of stay in for a second and establish yourself at your light level. All of the door frames and side lights and storefront will be a darker frame. All of hardware will be darker as well, all to provide that contrast and help people move through the space. All the flooring and any kind of wall texture will also be matte finish. to avoid glare either from outside light or the provided light inside the space. We included this just to be even clearer about what's meant by contrast. Again, as architects, we depend a lot on visuals and color, but you need to be really careful with our color values as it relates to contrast, and especially in grayscale, which a lot of people with visual impairment are mostly addressing objects in that way. So these colors, while up against each other, to a sighted person would seem totally different, but along the grayscale, they fall almost into the same light reflective value. So just to highlight again that there's a consciousness there that needs to be added. Specifically, you want to really make a jump up or down the scale of LRV. This doesn't cut it to just jump kind of one notch. This is the blow up of the community space and roof deck. Again, the base trim, dark, hardware, dark, doors and frames, darker than the walls surrounding. A couple of specific things to this space is really keeping an eye on furniture as well, making sure that the top of the table is contrasting, the floor below for the chairs. And then we've also created this path around the space that allows people to orient and be able to move through the space without dodging chairs and any other kind of furniture. The kitchen, which you'll see more in the residential, has contrasting surfaces versus the darker boxes. And then at our vertical transit, we've got colors that change at every level, the elevator lobby, and some textural changes as well. You can see those here. So each floor has its own color, which helps to identify kind of just general wayfinding. Again, the base and trim is the same. And then we've actually, with D4D, we're able to find some wall coverings that have Braille in them, which I think is really cool. And this has the words that are expressed in that wallpaper, which are just really lovely, positive, words: generosity, care, tenderness, empathy. So we're kind of excited to integrate that wall covering to the development. There's no slide here, but stairwells we expect will be pretty low use. Mostly people will be funneled to the elevator, especially with the parking deck separating the ground. But we'll have varied color between the rise and run. Obviously, our handrails will be darker than the walls surrounding. So really every element of the building needs some attention towards this. This slide highlights horizontal circulation hallways. Rita created this really strong image, I think, to the left, which kind of gives a sense of, our typical architectural image to the right and what the reality of that may be for someone with visual impairment. And it helps actually to run that filter, and it tells us what's working or not working. So we have handrails at either side that are darker than what's around. Our hallways are actually wider than we typically do. This allows for people to pass without interfering with each other, and also allows for service animals. And then we've marked each unit entry with a different color and tone, and then each door frame is darker. Each bit of hardware is darker, and then each light and sign, or each sign, is illuminated, and obviously all the signage throughout is tactile and has Braille. But actually, Chris Downey kind of advised us to include these so that there's at least a burst of brightness at each one of these to show you where that Braille sign is. These are our unit layouts. The layouts were fairly simple. I mean, they're accessible, universal design as it relates to bathrooms and kitchens. But I think the main thing to note here is simplicity of layout again, like the public spaces. You're kind of along straight walls here. Kitchen is very clear, living space is very clear, and generally the restroom and kind of service space is off to the right. So that's all we were driving towards here. And it's what we do with a lot of our developments, almost just from an affordability standpoint, but we're even sort of more intent on creating a really simple layout for these. And then this is jumping into one of those units. This is the 1-bedroom unit specifically. Dark base throughout, matte finishes throughout. A real heavy attention to how the horizontal and vertical surfaces differentiate. Again, light at the floor, dark box, light at the surface, dark box up here. Same goes for the restroom. You know, our fixtures are white on the dark floor. Same transition happens there. Hardware and trim, all dark. Actually, our receptacles and switches are dark on the light walls as well. All the window coverings are a pretty opaque roller shade. So you're given the ability to control what could be pretty bright exterior light on some of these facades. I didn't mention at the beginning, I forgot to, that this building will actually serve a mixed population. Not everyone will be dealing with visual impairment or blindness. So we're trying to design this so it works for absolutely everyone. So we do want to give people the ability to sort of throw their windows open, but also provide the ability to go really low light if that's desired. And this is like a very simple version of the small things to be thinking about. And obviously this applies to universal accessibility and general accessibility. Something that we found really challenging and really interesting is appliances. Generally, it would be easier if there were knobs and controls. Almost an old school version of appliances applies best to visual impairment. It's good to have like a tick for every move that's made. Unfortunately, new appliances have these kind of zippy digital controls, which don't lend themselves to a really simple use. So what we're looking at is either really simplified controls or going to the next level where things can be voice controlled. We're still working with the occupational therapy staff at Lighthouse to understand which of those is really better. Obviously, the voice activated kind of smart stuff can be sort of confusing for especially a senior crowd. So we're still kind of zooming in on that, but that's just an example of the things you're not necessarily always thinking of that can pop up on a project like this. Yes, I maybe went a little too quickly here, but that's the presentation. Please ask any questions that you'd like. I think my major takeaway from the project is really just that I think that the majority of these features could be in any project we do. You know, I think their impact in cost and aesthetics is actually really low. And I personally kind of feel like this was a total learning process for me, and I'll probably continue to integrate as many of these things as we can going forward, especially as it relates to seniors and really anywhere. You know, I think it's contributes to the idea of universal access. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. That was great. Really interesting project. I think we're all really excited to see it get started construction. There were a couple of questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure if you can see those or if only Steve and I can see those, but I'll start with one. Was have you provided a way for residents to make their space unique or giving them ownership of the space? I guessing that they're meaning like at the dwelling units, ways to personalize.
Nothing specific to say. You know, I mean, I think like any building you can personalize with plants, furniture, paint. but there's not, we haven't really provided things that can switch in or out of place. And we have done in the past kind of ways to mark the entry to the unit, and that's not something we've really discussed here yet. So unfortunately, the answer is sort of no outside of what you'd have at any sort of apartment building.
Sure.
And then the tactile art, this, we actually we looked at this. Liz Shortino, who's also involved with Brinshore, has connections to a number of artists that kind of work in that way. And I would love to get that integrated into the project. It is something we've discussed and presented to them. This is the boring answer, but budget is the driver.
Sure.
So I think that's something that we hope that they could sort of fundraise for, because I would love if each floor, even in the sort of lobby spaces, if we could really do something more specific to our project.
Yeah. I had the same thought. I mean, traditional artwork on the upper floor corridors is not going to have the same effect either, right? So like, are there different ways to think about how to enliven those corridors in a way that a non-seeing person would get some enjoyment out of? So yeah, that would be really interesting to explore.
Yeah, Heidi, those questions are pretty constant throughout. Our baseline is always to go to color, big, text, and it's like really you have to dial those instincts back and figure out what really will have an impact.
I saw a really cool art installation, and not for the same population, but I think the idea could translate in some sensory art that was actually in a dementia care setting, where it did have a visual component too, but it incorporated actual smells more for a reminiscing kind of concept. But I could see that being really interesting to have to activate other senses. Is there a way to incorporate sound art somewhere in the building? I was just at a conference in Milwaukee where you could push a button, it would play polka, and then they had pictures of people dancing polka, and it was like a really cool interactive art piece. So it seems like maybe, yeah, if money allows, that there could be some really interesting art opportunities throughout the building to just showcase that art is not just a visual art, right? That it can enliven all the senses.
We definitely also talked about sound art. The thing as a residence, we're trying to figure out how you curate it. How do you keep it so it's it's not the same thing? If you're here every day, that may be different than a community center, a museum. So
yeah,
we really like that idea, but we realized pretty quickly that it'll have to be managed so that it doesn't just get shut off at some point out of annoyance.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, that's a great idea.
Yeah. And then I saw Drew had a great question about a project that used railing with Braille incorporated to communicate what was in the landscape design.
We haven't talked about signage in the landscape yet, but that's an awesome idea, because I do think that people would be really interested, especially if you're touching it, smelling it, what is it? It shouldn't just be total mystery. So thanks for that, Drew. I think we'll work to incorporate that.
Well, it looks like a few questions filtered their way into the chat too. Somebody asked, what's the occupancy count just for number of dwelling units?
Yeah, I wrote that in the chat response. So the building is a total of 76 units, 18 of which are studios, 41 bedrooms, and 18 two-bedrooms.
Great. And I may have missed it, but it's all ages, right? Like it's not a senior specific building.
Correct.
Yeah. Someone else asked, when does construction start?
We hope within the next couple months. We're at the end of permit, just working through the financial closing, which can take some time.
Yeah.
Publicly funded work. And it's about almost 2 years, a little under 2-year construction process. It's a tight site. The Lighthouse building will remain functioning during. I told Steve this before. It's deep foundations. There's some complexity to how tightly packed we are on this site. So it'll be an interesting one for sure.
And Jack, you mentioned that that it's not specifically for people with vision impairments. Can you tell us a little bit about how that program is operating in terms of how the city is prioritizing that population? Or since I know it's using public funds, so they can't define it specifically for a single group.
I don't know, Steve. I apologize. I'd actually kind of feel uncomfortable responding to it because I'd want Brinshaw or
Right.
because
Okay.
I don't want to say the wrong thing. I mean, I think that the idea is that it favors those applications, but not in any way that would exclude, but just where it's advertised, who's invited and knows about it. I think we'll start with their population, but I could actually ask that and find out exactly and kind of send that if there's a desire to answer that. I know that's in your wheelhouse, the fair housing piece. Yeah.
And then someone else had an interesting question about related to acoustics and if thought or measures were given to people who use like sound, tapping sound as a navigation tool, who are using a cane, and were there considerations given in lobby spaces or major circulation space to what the acoustics needed to be like to possibly support that kind of navigation?
I'll say not in any intentional way. We're using carpet where we can, low pile carpet and drop ceilings, but we didn't, again, the spaces are pretty tight. We're not really worried about echo, bleed, they're pretty straight line spaces, but it's a good question. It may be that we find that the lobby or the community space needs a little additional acoustic deadening.
It's interesting. I actually, the consultant that you guys are working with, I think I saw a presentation that he gave quite a while ago. I think he does some of that too, like using sound, but it's not even necessarily about just dampening all the sound. Like he actually uses like the echoes on certain hard surfaces to orient and to know I'm in this kind of space because it has a different sound quality than another one. So it's really about giving distinction and identity via sound, versus using color or texture. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Just, might be something to ask him about too. Like if he has thoughts on specifics about how to create more distinction acoustically between types of spaces, like do circulation spaces want or need to sound differently than a gathering space where maybe it is more important to, have the acoustic clarity for being able to hear a program versus wanting to hear something that is a hard surface. So I know where I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
One
the
thing,
acclimation. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, apologies, Jack. One thing that our conversation with Chris Downey did note, especially in the residential corridors, but we tried to recess doors as much as possible too, so that as you're walking down a corridor, you're walking through a space, you're not getting that tapping on a unit door, maybe confusing the occupant or resident for a knocking. So trying to avoid the taps of canes to avoid confusion where possible.
Sure. Yeah.
And I should say this is a little nuts and bolts, but the building is 100% equipped with HVI alarm communication systems, which by code would be much less. So regardless of who moves in and out, those will be throughout the facility.
Looks like one other question about, are there any unique systems or engineering considerations that are part of the project to serve this particular demographic, or any additional specialty consultants brought in beyond Chris?
No, not on the mechanical side. That's kind of what this is hinting at. And really, Chris was the main design consultant that was brought on board. And like I said, the Lighthouse staff has been almost a consultant in themselves ultimately. And they have access to just a huge swath of that community. So no, I think the systems are actually pretty similar. It's really about control of those systems and how do we simplify those. Sure. and make it clear where controls are in space.
I'm sure you guys have the same thoughts about thermostats and how to make those simple and easy to use with the kind of high-tech programmable ones out there now.
It's interesting to me that there isn't more of a market for it. for appliances and different considerations here, because it honestly doesn't exist in a great way. I think we thought we would find a line that worked for visual impairment, and we end up sort of hunting for kind of things that are slightly better, and even worked again with the Lighthouse staff to research that. You know, we're finding slight improvements, but it feels like a part of the market that could improve, honestly, whether it's for visual impairment or even just any sort of senior residents.
Yeah, I was gonna say that would have applicability to a lot of different people. So.
Mhm.
Someone asked also about were any residents, or I guess potential residents or community members from the Lighthouse involved in the design process? I know you mentioned, you know, engaging with staff, but did they do any further outreach to their current client group or, you know, potential residents in terms of interview surveys or any other kind of engagement?
We've done multiple presentations to staff at executive level and kind of lower level, and I don't think they, you know, we don't have the roster of people that are going to live in the building, so it's been kind of hard to make that connection. But all throughout, we've been working with people that would, you know, eventually live in a space like this, but we've not. There isn't really a focus group or group of people that they know will be living in the space. So a lot of it's been with their staff and their executive staff, but that's been successful. You know, I mean, their knowledge base is really deep.
Sure. Yeah, I think you mentioned that part of their previous programming was that they would assist in making modifications to existing housing for clients too. So I gather that they probably had a lot of insight from, you know, what worked or what didn't work in those modifications.
Oh, yeah, it's been great. They're throwing PowerPoints at us, and you know, we sifted through what we can provide and what fits. And
yeah, no, that's
it's been
great.
really fruitful.
And on maybe a less obvious note too, we've been working pretty closely with the Illinois Medical District too. There's a lot of other construction projects going on in the area, and there was a lot of concern by Lighthouse themselves about, you know, what do we do to the Lighthouse's current users during construction? How do we get the users to the site and make it safe and easy for those with visual impairment to actually get to the existing building during construction? So working with street closures and adding additional crosswalks and drop-off areas has been really nice, and they've been a very supportive community during the construction planning process. So I think that's important to the Lighthouse as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Actually, that kind of begs the question of, since you are building on top of their primary access point, like, is there going to be a temporary new access point for current clients to continue to use services?
So there is this pull-in off Roosevelt, which you can kind of see here. So they'll have to use that more, and then some of the parking off the back, off Crenshaw, we're adding truly accessible spaces back there. It's kind of just a loading dock now.
Sure.
So that's part of our base construction, is making sure those things exist so they can be functioning, because it is a busy facility. It's hard to express until you visit, but so much overlapping function. So it's on their minds. You know, there's a lot of coordination there. General contractor.
Let's see, any new questions here? It's like one more kind of practical question about software that you guys use. I assume they're asking about your 3D modeling.
Yeah, we model. Rhea, you may have to step in here. I'm not sure what we use for the render. You know, it's a mix of Adobe and Rhino. We model out of ArchiCAD and sometimes SketchUp, but I think this was out of ArchiCAD.
Yeah, this is right out of CAD. To be honest, I don't recall what the renderings were.
Yeah, it's been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute.
Steve, did I miss any? I think I grabbed all the questions.
I think that's everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, last chance for questions. Anyone out there? And thank you again to Jack and Bria for a great presentation. So
Yeah, thanks for
Really
reaching out.
interesting project, yeah.
It forced us to pull this all together. You know, we've been just putting all these features in, but we had not summed it up, you know, and really taken a second look at it. So this has been kind of a nice exercise.
And speaking of that, Steve and Heidi, do you want to mention the tour idea that we hope we can arrange for?
Sure. So we're hoping after the groundbreaking and 2 years following the groundbreaking that there will be a tour before the building is fully occupied, you know, as a follow-up, which is always an exciting prospect. We did that with the town hall project on North Halsted, and was very well attended for both sessions, both the design presentation and then the tour. So we're hoping to follow up on this project as well.
Yeah.
No date yet.
Right.
You don't have to worry about
Yeah,
that, but we hope that, I think seeing these things come to reality during that little window when you're done and nobody's moved in yet
Right.
is very exciting. So I want to thank you all for setting this up, Heidi and Steve particularly for arranging for the program, and Bria and Jack and whoever else that Landon Bone, maybe Jeff, if he wants to bring himself back on the screen, for agreeing to share this project with you at this point. And it's very exciting, and we'll look forward to hearing more. Any last thoughts, Jeff, or anybody?
No,
I
thank you
thought it
guys.
was great. You guys did a good job, Jack.
Yeah.
I learned a lot.
Okay, that's great. Well, thanks everybody for being here today, and the program was recorded, so we will have a recording shortly. Things are busy over here. We're getting ready for the AI conference in June, which I'm sure everybody knows about by this point. But I hope we'll see many of you there at McCormick Place and also at other programs. So with that, I will say goodbye to everybody.
But Steve wanted to give a brief update too.
Oh,
on
yes,
future
I'm so
programs.
sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Yes.
we do have in May, we have Karen Swank of Light Glass will be doing a presentation on circadian lighting, specifically with a focus on senior residential settings. So it's not circadian lighting in the general scope, it's specifically artificial circadian lighting to enhance that population, basically, those settings. Later in the year, we're hoping to have a panel discussion related to making the move into senior living. And then at the end of the year, I think tentatively, we're looking at November. Steve Nargang with TLC Engineering will present on mechanical systems specifically for senior residential settings, which in this, I'll call it post-pandemic COVID era. That's wishful thinking, maybe. I think that has a lot of relevance right now. So that's another exciting program that we're looking forward to. And again,
I was
thank
just
you
gonna
to
jump in on the
Jack.
panel. It'll feature a resident of a senior living facility who is a former architect, a family member who has assisted somebody moving into senior living who is also an architect, and a design professional who kind of coordinates these moves for a living. Just kind of talking about their challenges and experiences, and what it was like to either handle that move or to experience it personally.
So check the AIA calendar for the actual
Yes.
dates and times.
Yeah.
It's all a little
Yep.
moving target right now.
It is, but the circadian lighting program will be posted in a day or two. So you can
Okay.
start signing up for that one. And with that, unless I've forgotten anybody else, anything else, we thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at the next program.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Jack and Bria.